My wife tried to get me locked up in a psych ward by faking documents, thinking everything would go her way. She and her mom had already secured their place at the top of the wreckage of my future, but they didn't expect me to make the first move. What I found out shattered their whole scheme, and now someone's definitely going behind locked doors. But trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The worst is yet to come. My name's Mike, I'm 30, and until recently, I thought my life was just a boring routine. You know how it goes. Working in IT, staring at the screen all day, pretending to fix problems with a few clicks. To everyone else, it looks like magic. But in reality, I spend most days just pretending to be busy. A great way to save energy while seeming productive. I live in a small town where the biggest news might be a kitchen fire or someone selling their car. Gossip spreads faster than coffee orders at the local cafe. Life was steady and peaceful. Then everything changed. And no, I'm not talking about the internet going down for a day. That's bad enough for an IT guy. I'm talking about real chaos, unraveling like the plot of some trashy crime show. Let's start from the top. I've been married to Jessica for 5 years. Well, married on paper, but lately it feels more like we're just roommates sharing a bed once in a while. It started out normal, like any marriage. There were times I'd interrupt her show by eating chips too loudly, and she'd glare like I'd committed a crime. Or she'd shout at me for leaving my socks everywhere, as if they were poison. But a few months ago, Jessica started acting strange. She wasn't just distant because of things like forgetting to buy bread or asking her to add less salt. She was cold, distant, like a fridge set to max. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was stressed from work or just tired of life. But over time, it became clear this wasn't just a rough patch. She started spending a lot of time on her phone. Not just scrolling through social media, but whispering to someone, like she was negotiating some secret deal. And every time I entered the room, she'd quickly stop talking or turn the phone off completely, making me feel like I'd interrupted something shady. The real shock came when I got home early one day. In IT, you can sometimes make yourself look productive and sneak out early. I walked in and found Jessica whispering to her mom on the phone. Her mom is a whole other story. She's always been a bit odd, talking about how she can see the future or how the stars are aligned for conspiracies. But this conversation felt different. I stood there, frozen, and everything clicked. You know that gut feeling when you just know something's wrong? That's exactly how I felt. My mind started connecting the dots. This wasn't just gossip or talk about new recipes. This was much deeper. And it hit me. They were plotting something, and I was at the center of their twisted plan. That night, things escalated so fast I couldn't believe it. You know how sometimes you come home after a long day, looking forward to chilling out on the couch, snacking on something, and maybe diving into a new show? Just regular plans of a regular guy, nothing out of the ordinary. I figured I'd spend the rest of the day in peace and quiet, maybe even reach a state of total zen while streaming something in the background. But nope, my plans for a quiet evening were rudely obliterated. And yeah, this was way more than just a random bad mood from the wife. Jessica came at me like a hurricane, full of fury, as if I'd just burned all her favorite things and forgot about it. I hadn't even fully stepped through the door when I heard, "You work too much, Mike. You've completely forgotten you have a family," she said, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Yeah, sure, I work a lot. How do you think these bills get paid?" This isn't some magical world where money falls from the sky, but apparently that answer didn't satisfy her. Honestly, I thought, all right, let her blow off some steam. She'll calm down. But man, was I wrong. "You don't pay any attention to us," she continued, like someone was turning up the volume in her head. "When was the last time you cared about how I was doing? Have you even listened to me once in the last few months?" And that's when it hit me. I was doomed. You know that feeling when you realize that no matter what you say, it's going to be used against you? If I said I cared, she'd explode even more. If I said no, well, that'd be a death sentence. So, I just stood there, silent, trying not to pour fuel on the fire that was already blazing way too fast. But the real kicker was still coming. "You're acting like a psycho, Mike. Do you even realize how hard it is to live with you?" She threw at me like lightning. Low blow. Where the hell did she get that idea? I don't chop down trees in the living room with an axe. I don't talk to the fridge about its feelings. So why the hell does she think I've lost it? I didn't even know what to say at that moment. Honestly, I just looked at her, raised my eyebrows, and thought, okay, you're overplaying this. It was just a bad day, fatigue, hormones, whatever. Just not a real issue. At least that's what I thought at the time. But a few days later, the whole thing took a turn I couldn't have imagined. Picture this, sitting at home, drinking coffee, trying to get back to some normal rhythm of life, and bam! A summons arrives. I couldn't believe my eyes. A summons? For me? For what? I figured it was some kind of joke or mistake. I open the envelope, start reading, and my jaw practically hits the floor. Turns out, my dear wife, the same one who, just a few days ago, claimed I was acting weird, had filed a court petition. And not just any petition. The document said I was mentally unstable and a danger to those around me. Do you get what that means? They wanted to send me to a psych ward. More specifically, lock me up in a mental hospital. And that wasn't even the end of it. Jessica had managed to forge a ton of documents, gathered signatures from some fake witnesses who supposedly confirmed that I really was a threat to myself and others. Can you believe how insane that is? One of those witnesses was our neighbor from the third floor, who, to be honest, was always a little off. She once declared that all men are psychos just because no one helped her open the door when she was carrying grocery bags. These are the kinds of people Jessica found to back up her story. It looked like I was about to end up in a padded room. I stood there in shock, not having a clue what to do. How the hell was I going to get out of this nightmare? Fear washed over me like a wave as I started to realize. This wasn't just a marital spat, and it definitely wasn't a rough patch in the relationship. This was something far darker, far more sinister. What the hell was even happening? We'd been happy, or at least I thought we were. Turns out, I'd been living in some naive illusion all this time while Jessica was weaving a conspiracy behind my back. And now my own wife was trying to get me locked up in a psych ward? Is this some new type of marriage vow? In sickness and in psychosis? I was in total shock. What had happened to the woman I'd been living with for 5 years? At first, I tried to calm myself down. You know when your brain tries to find a rational explanation for something that clearly makes no sense. Come on, this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe she overreacted. Who doesn't? She just had a bad day, I told myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was no misunderstanding. Things were starting to take on a really sinister shape. She planned this. This wasn't something decided in a moment of anger. No, she had been preparing for this, and not just for a day. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. It was like I was trapped in my own thoughts, and I began to recall every little thing, every oddity I hadn't noticed before. It's like when you realize before a big exam that you haven't studied anything, and your brain is in panic mode, trying to grasp any useful information. That was me. Everything started to fit together into one terrible puzzle. Her frequent phone calls with her mom, their secretive whispering in the corner of the room, like they were co-conspirators in some spy show. I never paid attention to it. I mean, what could a mother and daughter be talking about? I thought they were discussing basic stuff. Recipes, sales, TV shows, you know, typical woman talk. None of my business. But now, looking back, I realized it wasn't that simple. They were plotting something much sneakier, much more sinister. Every time I remembered her looks, those evaluating, studying glances, like she was trying to figure out if I was ready for the next step in their plan, I felt a chill run down my spine. Those looks, as if she was checking to see if I was mentally stable or if I had cracked yet. Like she was waiting for me to start acting crazy. And that's when I realized. They had been planning to set me up for a long time. This plot wasn't born yesterday. The only question was, when were they planning to make their final move? Something was holding them back. Maybe they were waiting for me to do something that would give them a real reason to act. Maybe they were counting on me gradually losing my mind under their pressure. or they were just waiting for me to finally break, so they could say, "See, he's dangerous." Because if they had a solid reason, I would have already been locked up in a padded room, surrounded by doctors and sedatives. But strangely enough, something was stopping them. And that's when I realized one important thing. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Yeah, they were playing it smart and crafty, but they had miscalculated. I'm not the type to break under pressure. Okay, I was nervous, sure. The situation, to put it mildly, was not pleasant. But not so much that I'd just give up. I realized that if I just sat back and waited for them to quietly ship me off to the psych ward, it would be game over. And honestly, I wasn't ready for that kind of ending. I wasn't about to be a victim in my own home, so I decided it was time to start taking action. Not just sitting around waiting for them to take me out of the game, but to make the first move myself. It was time to play for real. Time to gather evidence. Dude, I basically started my own little spy operation in my own home. Picture me with an invisible cloak and a bunch of gadgets, though in reality it was much simpler. But the essence was the same. First thing I did was get a voice recorder. Yeah, that's simple. I started recording every single conversation we had. Every time Jessica started her game, giving me that sly look and saying things like, "You're acting strange," or "I'm worried about you." I calmly hit record. It felt like I was starring in a low-budget spy movie where the main character has a recorder under his shirt and pretends like nothing's happening. Of course, it wasn't exactly legal, but when you feel like you're about to get shipped off to a mental hospital, legalities are the last thing on your mind. But the real star of this show was her mother. Seriously, she was like a character out of some thriller. Every time she came over to our house, her face lit up like she just won the lottery. She acted like every move she made was carefully planned, like she already saw her future where she and Jessica were running the show, and I was locked up behind padded walls. They always whispered to each other, like two conspirators plotting something creepy. And they thought I wasn't noticing? Seriously? But I had my own plans. I started keeping track of their every move, literally recording everything they talked about. It was like watching two characters from a crime novel discussing world domination. Only their goal was a little more modest, getting rid of me. But one day, I got lucky. I overheard something that made my blood run cold. One evening, when Jessica's mother was over again, they were whispering in the kitchen, as usual. And you know what they were talking about? About how they were going to send me to the hospital for a checkup. Do you get what that means? They were really discussing the details of the plan to get rid of me. And here's the fun part. Jessica's mom said something like, "He'll give up anyway. Mike's weak." Weak? Screw that. Thanks for the compliment, I guess. Really, weak? It pissed me off, but more than that, it made me angry. They clearly thought I'd just roll over and give up, that I had no clue what was going on. But I already had an ace up my sleeve, and I was about to play it. Right after that conversation, I gathered all my recordings, packed them up, and went to a lawyer. That was the moment I realized. Either I act now, or I end up in a situation I won't be able to get out of. When I showed everything to the lawyer, his reaction was priceless. He practically fell out of his chair. "Dude, this sounds like a thriller plot, but we've got a shot." Perfect. That's exactly what I needed to hear. A shot was all I needed. And what about Jessica? She kept playing her game, completely unaware that I was onto all her schemes. She thought I was still the naive fool, blind to everything, and kept acting like the innocent wife. But sometimes, it's better not to show all your cards right away. Let her think I'm still in the dark. This time it was my game, and I was going to play it to the end. It was time to stop playing spy and start launching a real offensive. If they wanted to play big, I could show them what I was capable of too. Sitting quietly and recording conversations was fun, but now it was time for serious action. I called the cops. Yeah, things had gotten that serious, and I had no other choice. Okay, let's see how they'll wiggle out of this, I thought, feeling the tension rise. When the cops showed up, I literally unloaded all the evidence on them. Recordings of conversations, fake documents, statements from neighbors who had noticed something was off. I'd gathered it all like a real detective, and now I was ready for the final showdown. The officers looked at me, then at the stack of evidence, like they'd stumbled into an episode of a trashy crime drama. But when they started going through all this crap, I saw their expressions change. At first, they looked like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. But when they got to the forged documents, yeah, that wiped the smiles off their faces. Apparently, forged signatures aren't just a minor prank. The police immediately started an investigation. I felt like the main character in a tense thriller. All those days of tiptoeing around, watching and gathering information, finally paid off. There was something insanely satisfying about that moment, when you realize that everything you've done is finally bearing fruit. This was my moment of triumph, though the real battle was still ahead. Just a few days later, things took an even crazier turn. Turns out, my sweet wife wasn't the only player in this dirty game. Oh no. Her mother, the same woman who'd always whispered and given me weird looks, was in it up to her neck. This lady wasn't just whispering in the corners. She was the mastermind behind the whole operation. All this time, she'd been weaving a plot to not only get rid of me as the mentally unstable husband, but to seize all our assets. The house, the money, everything Jessica and I had built over the years of marriage. But here's an even crazier detail. They even managed to include kids in their plans. And no, we didn't have kids. But in their scheme, they were going to do something like an adoption or guardianship to gain complete control over all the assets. What, they really thought they could adopt someone just for this scam? Dude, this is another level of insanity. When the cops uncovered the whole truth, it was a shocking revelation to everyone who knew us. Seriously, who would have thought that a family that seemed so ordinary, so normal, was actually plotting such creepy schemes? The local townsfolk, who thought they knew us inside and out, were in total shock. And Jessica and her mom? They thought it would all end in their victory. But as their carefully constructed plan started collapsing like a house of cards, I stood by with a calm sense of satisfaction, watching it all unfold. And there they were, the final notes. Their perfect plan was crumbling, and I knew this was far from the end of the show. I knew they had an even bigger shock coming, because their whole evil plot, which seemed so clever to them, was falling apart right before their eyes. And me? I stood by, relishing the feeling of triumph. The cops acted fast. They took all my evidence and literally pieced together the puzzle that had been obvious to me from the start. Turns out, the mastermind behind this crazy conspiracy was, as I suspected, Jessica's mom. Of course, this woman, with her sinister looks and constant whispering, wasn't content with just giving family advice. As soon as the police saw her handiwork in this scheme, it became clear that Jessica was just a pawn, and her mom was the true orchestrator of this thriller. Their plan didn't just stop at locking me up in a mental hospital. Oh no. They were planning to take full control of all our finances. Picture this. Me, the poor mentally unstable husband, isolated from society, while they, the powerful ladies, would control all my assets, making decisions on my behalf. They probably imagined themselves as the new queens of my house, ruling over my money and life as they saw fit. But I had bad news for them. This was far from the script they thought they were following. When the police came to arrest Jessica's mom with a warrant, it was a show that could have outdone the best theater productions. Honestly, if Shakespeare were alive, he'd have given a standing ovation. The woman put on such a performance that, if not for her criminal intentions, I might have felt a bit sorry for her. She cried, screamed, clutched her heart like it was the end of the world. "It's all lies. It's all a mistake. You don't understand," she wailed, casting terrified glances at the officers as if they were her mortal enemies who held her fate in their hands. I stood back and watched the whole spectacle, and one thought kept running through my mind. "Lady, if you're this good at drama, you really should have gone into acting, not scam organizing." She would have killed it on stage, squeezing tears from the audience. But unfortunately for her, there was no audience ready to stand up for her this time. The problem for her was that the facts spoke for themselves. All the evidence I'd carefully gathered was now in the hands of the police. No amount of dramatic tears and desperate pleas could help her wiggle out of this one. The cops weren't impressed by her sobs and complaints. They calmly cuffed her and took her to the station. The whole thing played out with such cold resolve that even her loud cries and wails couldn't break the icy atmosphere of justice. And here's where it gets even more interesting. While her mom was being carted off in the police car, Jessica stood there, frozen, as if struck by lightning. Her eyes were wide, and she was clearly in shock at how fast their evil plan was falling apart. All those months of scheming, lying, and trying to set me up, it all crumbled before her eyes like a house of cards built on sand. I think at that moment, it finally hit her. This wasn't just a failure, this was a disaster. Their entire strategy, which they thought was foolproof, had collapsed in an instant. And honestly, in that moment I felt on top of the world. I couldn't hold back a smug grin. This wasn't just the collapse of their plan, it was a total defeat, and I finally got to enjoy my moment of triumph. After her mom was arrested, Jessica tried to pull the classic move. "It wasn't me, it was her." Seriously? She thought she could throw everything onto her mom and walk away clean? Not a chance. She, of course, put on a show, claiming her poor mother was just not in her right mind, trying to convince everyone that she was as much a victim in this as I was. Oh yeah, sure, I totally bought that. The problem for her was, she'd already screwed herself the moment she agreed to be a part of this. If you play with fire, don't be surprised when you get burned. Her pathetic attempts to play the innocent victim didn't last long once I laid out all my evidence in court. And trust me, it was quite the collection. Recorded conversations, forged documents, witness statements. If this were an episode of a crime series, I'd have earned a standing ovation. Jessica clearly didn't expect me to come this prepared. She thought I'd stay the helpless idiot, easily fooled. But nope, her little game had spun out of control. The trial dragged on for a long time, and it was agonizing. Every hearing felt like a battle, where I had to prove that I wasn't insane, but rather caught in the middle of a conspiracy hatched by two women with a power complex. But in the end, justice prevailed. The court ruled in my favor, and I was free. No white walls, no straitjackets. My freedom was the best blow to their twisted plans. And Jessica? She was left with nothing. No support, no protection, and most importantly, no brilliant scheme. She now had to face the reality that life was a lot harsher than she'd expected. I was glad it was finally over. And as for her, well, she got what she deserved. After all the circus with arrests, trials, and revelations, I, of course, divorced Jessica. I mean, how could I not? Dude, this wasn't a marriage, it was a soap opera with scandals, intrigue, and an attempt to have me committed. Let's just say, was there any chance for a, we can still fix this? Absolutely not. I was ready to run from her faster than I'd ever run from anything before. Her reputation? Completely destroyed. In our small town, stuff like this doesn't go unnoticed. People hear gossip faster than they refresh their news feeds. Jessica is now a local celebrity, but in the worst way possible. Imagine, her fragile, perfect wife mask shattered right in front of everyone. And I'll admit, it was incredibly satisfying to watch. And her mom? Well, here's the sweetest part. She ended up exactly where she'd been trying so hard to send me. In a psych ward. The irony is just screaming. She worked so hard to have me locked up, and in the end, she's the one behind closed doors with padded walls. I don't know what they do there, but I hope she's happy with her new surroundings. As for me, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a triumph. I literally clawed my way out of their twisted plan, beating the ones who tried to break me. Dude, this wasn't just a win, it was a triumphal march, just without the fanfare. Sometimes I think it was all just a nightmare, but when you survive something like this, you realize no one's ever going to try and play games with you again. Now I've got immunity to this kind of drama, and the next person who tries something like this with me won't even make it to the final round.